During some of the darkest chapters of European history, torture was organized, legal, and carefully planned. It was used not just to punish, but to control entire populations through fear, humiliation, and unbearable pain. Among the many devices created for this purpose, one stands out for its disturbing simplicity and the horrifying depth of suffering it was built to cause. Can you imagine that there was once a chair designed not to support your body, but to tear it apart, slowly, painfully, and publicly? A piece of wood and iron so cruel that its victims often confessed before even being touched by it. Today we're talking about one of the most twisted torture devices ever recorded in human history. This is the story of the Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle was a torture device developed during the latter stages of the Middle Ages, likely around the 16th century. It was simple in appearance, but its purpose and effects were extremely brutal. The core of the device was a tall, pyramid-shaped point fixed on a base, often made of wood and sometimes reinforced with metal. The pointed pyramid was mounted on a stable frame or stool supported by several legs. The height and width of the structure could vary, but the design always served the same function: to cause continuous physical pain and severe internal injury through pressure. Above the cradle, a system of ropes and pulleys was used to control the victim's movement. Torturers would attach these ropes to the victim's wrist or torso and slowly raise them off the ground. The person was usually stripped of their clothing before being suspended. Once the person was suspended above the pyramid, the torture began. The ropes would be slowly released, allowing the victim's full body weight to push them downward onto the sharp point. The shape of the pyramid forced the body to stretch unnaturally as the person was lowered. The pressure would concentrate on the most sensitive part of the lower body, targeting the soft tissues between the legs. This area of the body was not built to withstand sharp pressure from below, so the pain began immediately and increased with each passing moment. To make the process more effective, torturers often tied weights to the victim's legs. These weights increased the downward force, causing the pyramid to press deeper into the body. The added pressure accelerated the physical damage. Muscles tore, skin stretched beyond its natural limit. The internal injuries became more serious with every minute spent on the device. The sharp shape of the pyramid did not need to pierce like a blade. Instead, it forced its way deeper into the body as the victim's own weight did the work. Oil or grease was sometimes applied to the pyramid's tip. This was not done to ease suffering. The goal was to make the body slide more easily so the spike could enter with less resistance and reach deeper tissues. This method helped keep the process under the torturer's control. A smoother surface allowed them to stretch out the pain over a longer period, often for several hours. In some cases, the torture was repeated over multiple days, depending on the strength of the victim and the patience of the executioner. The Judas Cradle was also used in combination with movement. Once the victim was lowered and partially impaled, the torturer might begin to rock the person's body from side to side. This motion caused the point to shift inside the wound, tearing tissues in different directions. In some cases, the victim was lifted slightly and dropped again, sometimes many times in a row. Each drop caused sudden, sharp pain and made the injury worse. The bouncing effect was a way to increase the trauma without ending the torture too quickly. The process was designed to continue for as long as possible. Over time, the damage done by the device became more than the body could manage. Even when the victims survived their session, their condition was often beyond recovery. The goal of the Judas Cradle was not to cause a quick death. It was to stretch the limits of human endurance and to control the body through pain. It was also used to control others, those who watched and who feared being next. The slow nature of the torture made every part of it worse. And still, this was only the beginning of what victims experienced. As you will see soon, the Judas Cradle was not just a physical punishment. It was also a tool for psychological destruction. The physical effects were severe. As the body sank lower, organs inside the lower abdomen were often torn or bruised. Blood vessels were damaged, and internal bleeding followed. Infections were very common, especially because the device was never cleaned between uses. Wounds created in such a deep and sensitive part of the body often became infected quickly. Without antibiotics or modern medical care, many people died days later, not from the pyramid itself, but from illness caused by it. Sometimes the injuries were so serious that death came within hours. If a torturer added heavy weights or used the cradle aggressively, the internal damage could cause massive bleeding or shock. But most of the time, the process was much slower. The body broke down gradually, victims lost blood, they became weak, they struggled to breathe, the pain did not stop, and neither did the fear. The cradle was never meant to kill fast. It was meant to drag the victim to the edge of death and keep them there. But what made the Judas Cradle truly terrifying was not just the pain it caused, it was the fear that came before. The psychological horror began even before the ropes were tied. Victims who saw the device often began to cry, scream, or beg. In some cases, people lost control of their bodies out of fear. Historical records describe victims fainting at the sight of the pyramid. Some were so terrified that they would confess to anything, even crimes they never committed, just to avoid being placed on it. Those who did not faint had to watch the device being prepared. They could see the ropes, they could see the spike, they could hear the chains being moved after the pulleys creaking above their heads. Some heard the screams of others who had gone before them. This created a feeling of complete helplessness. They knew what was coming, and they could do nothing to stop it. When victims passed out during the torture itself, they were not released. Torturers would stop the process just long enough to bring the person back to consciousness. Cold water was sometimes thrown on them. In other cases, sharp slaps or shouted commands were used. Once the victim was awake, the torture continued. The goal was to make sure the person experienced every second of it. Pain had to be felt, remembered, and feared. The humiliation added another layer to the suffering. Being stripped of clothes in front of others removed the victim's last sense of dignity. They stood exposed and completely vulnerable. Public shame was part of the punishment. In many cases, other prisoners, guards, or officials were present to watch the torture. Sometimes the torture was in full view of the public as well. It is important to understand that in medieval times, punishment was often designed to be seen by others. The cradle turned the human body into a public example. The shame of being exposed, the pain of being tortured, and the fear of what was still to come worked together to erase the victim's sense of control. And to witnesses, it was a dire warning of the consequences of defying authority. Historical records give us a glimpse into how the victims reacted. In some preserved diaries and trial notes, victims described their fear in their own words. One 16th century monk recorded what he saw during a torture session. He wrote that the victims screamed to the heavens for mercy, even though no mercy came. The monk said it felt like watching the gates of hell open before us. His words give us a sense of how deep the horror reached. Other writings describe innocent people who confessed to serious crimes just to avoid the Judas Cradle. These were often not criminals or enemies as we might think of them today. Many were ordinary people accused of witchcraft, heresy, or disloyalty. They confessed under pressure not because they were guilty, but because they could not face the pain. The fear of torture alone was often enough to force a confession. Once someone confessed, their fate was sealed. But where did this brutal torture method come from? Most historians believe that the Judas Cradle first appeared in 16th century Spain. During this period, one of the most powerful organizations in Europe was the Spanish Inquisition, a system that aimed to identify and punish people who were considered enemies of the Catholic faith. These could include people accused of heresy, witchcraft, secret beliefs, or speaking against church teachings. The Inquisition used many forms of torture to force confessions, and the Judas Cradle may have been one of its more specialized tools. Its design allowed torturers to inflict long-lasting pain without causing instant death. This made it especially useful during interrogations, where the goal was to make someone talk without ending their life too quickly. There are a few written records from this time that describe the cradle in full detail, but drawings, second-hand accounts, and surviving museum pieces show that it existed and was used in different regions. Like many tools of torture, the cradle was not always recorded in official documents. Executioners and inquisitors often worked behind closed doors. However, the stories of those who witnessed its use or survived it helped preserve its memory. The name Judas Cradle may have been chosen for symbolic reasons. It refers to Judas Iscariot, the biblical figure known for betraying Jesus. In Christian tradition, Judas is often remembered as the ultimate traitor. By naming this device after him, torturers may have wanted to send a message. Anyone who turned against the church or the crown would be treated like the greatest betrayer in history. This connection gave the device both religious and emotional power. It was not only a machine for pain, it was a symbol of punishment for those who went against authority. Over time, the Judas Cradle did not stay limited to Spain. It spread across Europe, appearing in different countries under different names. In each place, the core design remained the same, a sharp, pyramid-shaped seat, but some details changed depending on local customs and beliefs. In Italy, the cradle was known as culla da guida. Italy was home to several city-states during this period, each with its own legal and religious systems. The cradle may have been used in places where local leaders wanted to keep control over their citizens. Just like in Spain, it was likely used during interrogations and public punishments, especially when the accused were believed to be hiding the truth. In Germany, the same device was called the Judas which means Judas Cradle or Cradle of Judas. German city-states also had strong religious courts, particularly during the time of the Protestant Reformation and Catholic counter-movements. The cradle fits into the larger pattern of using fear to maintain order. Whether someone was accused of heresy or rebellion, the threat of being placed on the cradle could silence opposition before it even began. In France, the device took on an especially chilling variation. There, it was often referred to as a unravel, which translates to the wake. The name reflected a unique way that the cradle was used in French territories. Rather than focusing only on physical torture, French authorities also used it to exhaust victims mentally and emotionally. In this version of the punishment, the victim was tied above the pyramid, but not immediately lowered. Instead, they were suspended just above the point and forced to remain awake and completely still for long periods of time. The tension came from knowing that even the smallest movement, especially from falling asleep or relaxing the muscles, could cause the body to slip down and begin the torture. The longer the victim stayed awake, the longer they avoided injury, but staying tense for hours or even days was nearly impossible. This approach turned the Judas Cradle into more than a tool for questioning. It became a psychological trap, where the victim tortured themselves simply by trying not to move. In France, this method was especially feared by prisoners. It allowed the torturer to stand back and wait while the victim's own body delivered the punishment. Every country used the device in slightly different ways, but the goal was always the same. The Judas Cradle was a weapon of control. It made people obey. It forced them to confess. It kept communities silent, even when they knew something was wrong. The Judas Cradle was a specialized tool. It was usually chosen for people who were considered dangerous, disobedient, or suspicious by those in power. But the reasons behind these accusations were often unclear or deeply unfair. Men who faced the Judas Cradle were often accused of serious crimes against religion or the state. During the Spanish Inquisition, for example, many men were arrested for being heretics, people who were believed to be spreading false ideas about the faith. Some were Jews or Muslims who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of still practicing their old religion in secret. Others were early scientists, writers, or political opponents who were seen as threats to authority. A man could be accused simply for owning a banned book, questioning a priest, or speaking against a king. Women, on the other hand, were often accused of witchcraft or sexual sins. In parts of Europe, especially during witch hunts in the 16th and 17th century, thousands of women were arrested after being blamed for illness, bad weather, or failed crops. These women were usually older, poor, or lived alone. Some were midwives or herbalists. Others were just unlucky enough to be disliked by their neighbors. Authorities believed that witches had made pacts with the devil. To prove it, they demanded a confession. The Judas Cradle became one of the tools used during these interrogations. Women accused of witchcraft were stripped, tied, and lowered onto the spike to make them admit their guilt. The shame of being naked in front of male guards, combined with the pain of the device, broke many victims quickly. Women could be tortured for adultery or moral corruption. In societies where women were expected to remain silent and obedient, even small acts of independence could be punished harshly. A woman seen speaking too freely, refusing to marry, or defending herself in public could be accused of improper behavior. The Judas Cradle, in these cases, became a punishment not just for actions, but for stepping outside expected roles. In both cases, men and women, the common thread was control. The device was not used on the powerful, it was used on the powerless. Those without protection, without wealth, or without social support were the most likely to face the cradle. The torture reminded others to stay quiet, follow rules, and never question those in charge. Many people believe that torture devices like the Judas Cradle are only a part of history, forgotten tools from a darker time, but the truth is more uncomfortable. While the Judas Cradle itself is no longer in use, the ideas behind it, pain, fear, and control, have not disappeared. In fact, methods just as cruel have appeared in different parts of the world, in different forms, and sometimes even in recent years. One of the most disturbing comparisons to the Judas Cradle comes from Asia, where a method known as bamboo torture was reportedly used for centuries. While the design was very different, the goal was the same: to cause pain slowly, silently, and without escape. Bamboo is one of the fastest growing plants in the world. Under the right conditions, some types of bamboo can grow more than an inch per hour. Bamboo is also strong, sharp, tough. In bamboo torture, a person was tied down over young bamboo shoots planted in the ground. They would be stretched flat, arms and legs secured so they could not move. The tip of the bamboo was aimed at a soft part of the body, usually the lower back or the area between the legs. At first, nothing would happen, but over time, as the bamboo grew upward, it would push into the skin. Unlike metal spikes, bamboo did not need to be sharpened by hand. Its natural point could easily pierce through flesh. As the hours passed, the growing shoot would work its way into the body, deeper and deeper. The plant itself became the torturer. Victims could do nothing to stop it. This method may sound like a legend, but reports of bamboo torture have been passed down through stories and some military accounts. Some sources claimed it was used in Southeast Asia, including Sri Lanka and Thailand, and possibly even during conflicts involving Japanese forces in the 20th century. However, clear historical records are limited. What remains is the fear the stories still create. Just like the Judas Cradle, bamboo torture plays on the idea of waiting, of knowing pain is coming and not being able to stop it. The idea of growing pain created by natural forces or slow pressure is not unique to any one culture. It is a pattern seen in many parts of the world, one that shows how creative and cruel torture methods have been, even when the tools seem simple. But torture today does not always involve devices. It continues in many places in ways that leave fewer marks but create the same fear and damage. According to Amnesty International, between 2009 and 2013, cases of torture or cruel treatment were reported in over 100 countries. That means more than half of the world still faces problems with human rights abuses. Control through fear, the very purpose of the Judas Cradle, still exists today. Whether it happens in secret prisons or under official systems, the tools may have changed, but the results are hauntingly familiar. Across time and place, pain has been used as a way to silence people, and sadly, that part of human behavior has not yet been left behind. What other torture methods do you know of that you think are just as disturbing, or maybe even worse? Let us know in the comments below. If this story shocked you or made you curious to learn more, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. We've got many more untold tales, lost punishments, and chilling truths from the past coming soon.